Welcome to Section 8. This is Virtualizing Windows Server. We'll take a look at Hyper-V here in this section. We'll do a brief recap or overview of the components, depending on if you worked through them previously or if you skipped through some of those sections. We'll also take a look at Windows licensing again to make sure that you are choosing the right version of Windows Server to meet your virtualization needs. Then we will start focusing on how we'll use Hyper-V in our lab environment. So we'll install the Hyper-V components onto a Windows 2016 server in the lab environment using a new feature called nested virtualization. So to try to keep this as straightforward as possible, we will have my laptop running Windows 10 with Hyper-V components installed, running a virtual machine of Windows Server 2016 with Hyper-V components installed, and then potentially virtual machines there. We'll also take a look in that context with setting up differencing disks, which is a great way to set, say, a base gold image for your Windows Server, and then just use the differencing disks for the individual virtual machines you're building. And at least for the purposes of this lab, that's going to allow you to spin up new machines much faster than going through the full install every time you want to have a new server. So let's move ahead into the Hyper-V component review. In this video, we're going to review just the main components. This will be a review if you've been working through Hyper-V on this course. If you have not, it may be a bit of a primer for you. So let's go ahead. I'm going to jump onto my Lab Server 02, which I have set up an instance of Hyper-V here that is running on Server 2016. So the main three components we're going to be walking through here are the compute, the network, and the storage. And we won't be doing deep dive into those settings. This is more of a general overview as to how to get started and how to make some basic configurations in order to keep moving through these lab exercises. So the first thing we have in the action pane is new, which will allow us to set up a virtual machine, a hard disk, or a floppy disk. So you'll spend most of your time in virtual machines or hard disk. It's about as useful as an actual floppy disk drive anymore. I have seen some tools such as Packer that are used to build base images for Windows that will use that A drive to supply the auto unattend file in order to bootstrap that system. So under the virtual machine, you'll go through a wizard, and this wizard will allow you to name the machine and its location. A generation 1 or 2, so you have some newer virtualization features under generation 2, but only on supported operating systems. So if you are just sticking with Windows Server 2016, that may be a great option for you. If you see yourself installing Linux operating systems or any older versions of Windows, then you may just want to stick with generation 1 for that particular machine. Now you can use memory here dynamically or statically, so we can set the amount of memory that we want to use, and then if we use dynamic, it will expand to using that. If we use static, it's just going to reserve that space for us right off the bat. Under networking, we can select what switch we want to be a part of. We haven't actually configured the switch here yet, so we'll get to that shortly. And then you can connect a virtual disk. If you don't have one, you can create one, or just skip through. Once we start working with differencing disks towards the end of this section, we'll be using this existing virtual hard disk as we'll go through and create disk first and then attach the machine to it. You get the option to install the operating system, either install later to skip through it, use that virtual floppy disk if you can shove an operating system there, or you can pick an ISO or a physical drive with that ISO mounted. After that, you should get a summary. This is what it's going to build. I'll go ahead and cancel out of here as we're not going to build that right now. So that's setting up a new virtual machine. To set up a new hard disk, you go to New Hard Disk and you get into another wizard where you can select from VHD, VHDX, which allows you to get a larger size, and then you get more consistency fixes and things like that. You should just stick with the VHDX format. It is a newer format, and it'll allow you for more functionality down the road. And then you can also work with a VHD set, and that's going to be outside of the scope of what we're doing here in this course. So then you can choose your disk type, and this is something we'll see towards the end here when we work with the differencing disks. We can dynamically expand that disk so it doesn't immediately take up all the space on our drive. We can set a fixed size, which will give you a bit better performance, but does take up more disk space. And then we have a differencing disk where we can set up that parent-child relationship where we can point to our parent, we can add the child for the new machine we're going to build, and then all the changes will be written to that disk. So I'll go ahead and move out of there. The last thing we have is a virtual switch manager, and this allows us to create 3 different types of switches, an external, an internal, or a private. Now, if you used Hyper-V previously in this course, you should be familiar with working with that internal network as we set up an internal network and we're using NAT to communicate with the outside world. In this case, this is sitting inside that network. So we are going to just create a virtual switch for external here. I'll go ahead and just call it external. It is going to use that Hyper-V adapter. We're going to allow the management operating system to share, and then we'll go ahead and apply this. We are connected with the virtual machine connection manager, so we shouldn't see any network drop. So I'll let that apply. And now that it's applied, if we go back to the switch manager, we should see we have an external switch here that we can use. So that's it for the overview of the basic components in Hyper-V.